This is Office Hours at Duke University. Today's conversation is with Professor David Malone. He's going to be talking about the learning component of service learning. Everyone watching is invited to participate in this conversation. To do that, send an email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet in your question with the tag Duke Live or post it on the Duke University Facebook page. I'm James Todd with Duke's News Office, and Professor Malone, we are here at your online office hours. Let me tell everyone watching just a few things about you. You are the director of Duke's Service Learning Program and have yourself taught service learning courses for at least 2 decades now. You are also an associate professor of the practice in the program in education here, where you serve as director of undergraduate studies. And we should also say that you are a proud Duke graduate. You got your PhD in education here. So in talking about service learning, the topic, I think it would be helpful to use some examples of service learning courses. Your program supports more than 50 of them here at Duke. So could you pick out some of those to show the different approaches to service learning?
I think a good place to start is to think about different types of service learning classes. There's a misconception that all service learning classes involve direct continual service, like students going into the community several hours a week, say volunteering in a homeless shelter. But there are different types, and maybe if I talk a little bit about the different types and give examples of them.
Yeah.
So I would think of this first type as like a direct service type. Mm-hmm. So a good example there would be Professor Jeff Forbes teaching through robotics class. This is a computer science class here at Duke. And so students have academic goals in this class. They're learning about computer science. It's a rigorous course, but at the same time, they're working with middle school students who are preparing for an international competition in building robots. As a matter of fact, this Saturday, tomorrow, at the Levine Science Research Center, there's going to be a competition in which Professor Forbes and his college students work with middle school students who have been designing these. So they go to middle schools every week and they provide a direct service in helping these students learn the math and the science and technology behind robotics. Another type of service learning course might be what we call a demonstration service learning course. And a good example of that here at Duke is our chemistry outreach course taught by Professor Ken Lyle. And this is a course in which chemistry majors primarily, and they love this course as a matter of fact, they prepare and do the homework to design chemical experiments which they then go into the community and perform. Places like the Museum of Life and Science, they've done this at the State Fair, they've done this in a variety of schools, and they interact with children who might not have all the opportunities or exposures to science that some other children have, and they get children excited about science essentially by blowing things up in test tubes and doing all these wonderful things. And then they reflect on the things that they've learned, not only about the science of this, but also about the ethical and civic dimensions of working with the community. Another type of service learning course might be what is thought of as a immersion experience. For example, our study abroad office, led by Margaret Riley, is working with Duke Engage and Eric Malone and Elaine Madison to try to develop ways in which we might integrate study abroad programs with Duke Engage programs and with service experiences. So students might live in a community for, say, 8 weeks as they do in Duke Engage and reflect on both the intellectual aspects of their experiences and the service aspects. And then I think we have what are called project-based service courses.
Okay.
So David Shod's course, Natural Catastrophe, is a good example of that. So these are courses where students spend, say, an early part of the semester preparing for a service experience. And in David's case, they went to New Orleans this past spring break. They worked on engineering projects such as water treatment plants. And then when they return, they have a post kind of experience in which they reflect again on the various dimensions of this. And then finally, another type we might think about are community-based research classes or research service learning classes. These are classes, this was actually an approach to service learning that was partially developed here at Duke with Alma Blunt and the Heart Leadership Program, Elizabeth Kiss and Keenan Institute, Vicki Stocking, Jennifer Ahern Dotson, Betsy Alden, some others here at Duke. And they got a very significant FIPSE grant in the, I think, 2002. And this is an approach to service where students might work in teams, and they might be focused on a research question. A good example of this would be Charlotte Clark's course, Food and Energy, which is offered in the Nicholas School. And this is a course that's been very successful because they're focusing on issues of sustainability. So the students are put in teams, and their partner, all of these courses, by the way, it's a work of a university faculty member, university students with a partner in the community. In this case, I think Charlotte's partner is a campus community partner, Duke Dining.
Okay.
And they looked at ways in which we might improve Duke's carbon footprint. So, matter of fact, they developed, I think, over the course of the semester, a new takeout, reusable takeout container that Duke Dining has adopted. So there's
you get your food and you bring it back.
Get your food, you wash it, you bring it back, and it's more sustainable. So there's a variety of approaches to service learning, and it comes in kind of all shapes and forms.
Now, you yourself have been teaching a course, educational psychology, for about 20 years that's involved into a service learning course.
Yes.
So how did that become a service learning course? Maybe what were some of the steps and missteps along the way, the wisdom that you learned?
Well, at first the course was more of a field experience, which is a little different of a model than service learning. I mean, I primarily was thinking about my own college students and wanting to get them to have an exposure to schools. So I would develop a partnership with schools, but primarily the students in the class just went and observed teachers as they taught, and they might help out a little bit by making a bulletin board. But as my relationship with these community partners, in my case, principals and teachers in Durham schools, grew and strengthened, the teachers and principals began to communicate and identify to me needs that they thought we could better address with the Duke students than having the Duke students just simply sit in classrooms and make sort of clinical observations. So as a part of the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership, which, as you know, Duke has a tremendous commitment to, in the mid-90s, we began thinking about this a little differently. So we had a series of meetings with school principals about what the needs were in their school. And one of the needs that they identified was that fourth and fifth graders were not performing at the levels that they needed to perform in reading and math. So we began to design a service experience in which students would be matched up one-on-one with fourth and fifth graders in the Durham schools to provide tutoring in math and reading. And then I began to change my course. Of course, you know, one of the things that happens in service learning classes is the entire dynamic of teaching and learning begins to change, because students bring into the class now real live problems.
Right.
And if I stand up there and I'm just kind of clicking on my PowerPoint and I want to go over, say, in my case, things like theories of motivation and how they relate to children and teachers in schools, invariably some student is going to interrupt and say, well, you know, I don't believe this particular theory about positive reinforcement is viable, because in my service learning experiences, I have tried this and it hasn't been successful. As a matter of fact, it might have backfired. And so these real life, real contextual situated learning problems begin to change the way the course is taught. So as my course has evolved, I've had to kind of adjust the way I teach it and provide space for this critical reflection, which is such an essential part of service learning.
Yeah, so talk about that learning piece, because I mean, tutoring is obviously a service, so how are you working that in with the classroom teaching?
All right. Well, in my case, I have academic topics, academic learning outcomes. This is a key part of service learning. James, it might be helpful if I define what service learning is.
Please, yeah, what's the definition?
Because a lot of people have misconceptions about service learning. They think of it as community service, or they think of it as community-based learning, but it's really it's a very specific approach to teaching and learning. It's a pedagogy, if you will, an instructional method that has intentionality about it. in terms of integrating academic learning outcomes with a service experience, whereas community service is more of volunteerism. So for example, if I devote my time and my effort to working with Habitat with Humanity and building a house, that's a wonderful experience. But without reflection and without integration of some academic component, I would refer to that as community service. So service learning begins with an academic intellectual agenda. So in my case, I'm teaching a course in educational psychology, so I want to go over theories of learning. I want to go over theories of how we best foster or facilitate learning. I want to go over issues of diversity and cultural difference. I want to go over motivational theories. I want to go over how we assess and evaluate children's learning. I want to go over, in some part, educational policy. So I have these academic and theoretical aspects of my course that I want students to leave the course knowing something about. And the service experience, the way I have to provide time within every class, and then within the homework assignments, within the readings, which connect the service experiences students are having to these topics. So it requires effort on my part to do this. And oftentimes the students are a little bit initially kind of confused by this because it's kind of breaking the mold of teaching is telling, kind of a more passive sort of approach to teaching, that my job is just to disseminate knowledge. And students often come to learning with that kind of sense of that's what teaching is. And their sense of learning, essentially, in many cases, is that it's remembering and retelling. And one of the good things about service learning as a pedagogy is that it completely demolishes that model, because students become much more actively engaged in these issues because they see them being situated in a real life context.
Yeah, we've got a question that's come in about the amount of effort that goes into planning in these. We actually have about 200 people participating in online office hours here, and everyone watching can ask Professor Malone a question. To do that, send an email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet your question with the tag Duke Live, or post it on the Duke University Facebook page. This question comes from Jack by email and says, these service learning opportunities sound great, but they take a lot of time for students and teachers alike. Don't they inevitably put pressure on a university's core mission of teaching things like calculus, literature, engineering?
Well, they do require resources, and they do require preparation, and they do require faculty members who are committed to this as a pedagogy. Now, one of the ways I like to think about service learning is it's one tool in our instructional toolbox at a college or university. It's one piece of a larger array of the ways in which faculty approach teaching and learning. It's certainly not the only way. So I like to think about, I would like to think that, particularly here at Duke, that we want to be doing things that have a high impact instructional practices. And I do think here at Duke that we do engage in high impact instructional practice through our focus program, our Writing to Learn, Writing in the Discipline program, number of capstone courses that we have, the number of undergraduate research mentorships that students are involved in. So service learning kind of fits in this this array of ways in which we might make the campus more engaged intellectually. And it certainly isn't for everyone.
And talking about where service learning fits in broadly in the campus, you served on a committee recently that looked at this question in the context of the Duke Engage program and the Center for Civic Engagement here. And the committee came out with this Engaging Excellence report, which some committee reports are pretty bland. This one was fairly pointed. And so let me just pull a quote from here and see if you can explain. It says, the report says, either Duke strives ahead in pursuit of excellence in the field of civic engagement service learning, or it continues to deliver a host of programs that, though in most cases impressive in themselves, are part of no coordinated strategy, share no common definition of civic engagement, have no common perspective or conversation about best practices, and are only loosely connected to the core missions of the university. A decisive step is needed. So can you talk about this process of thinking big picture, the overall mission and purpose of the university, and where service learning, civic engagement fit into that?
Right. Well, in terms of the mission of the university, the indenture to the university itself, 1924, James B. Duke, says that the mission of the university is to provide a liberal education. But it goes on to say that education should involve more than an academic and an intellectual mission. It should involve an ethical and a civic dimension, and that we should produce graduates who will be ethical leaders in the community. So this is a part of who we are as Duke University, and it's central to what we do. It's a part of our core mission. And its civic engagement's been going on at Duke University since the very beginning. As a matter of fact, the university itself began as a normal college to prepare public school teachers. So we have a long history of this, and a long time prior to our recent developments in the Klein Wells, there's been many successes on campus in terms of student engagement. As a matter of fact, one of the things about the Klein Wells report, this is the committee's report, is that it acknowledges that all the wonderful ways in which students, faculty, and staff have been civically engaged at Duke for decades. As a matter of fact, Duke recently was recognized on a national level by the Carnegie classification. Now, this is a very rigorous and serious process of vetting in which universities are recognized as being engaged campuses with their communities. And it's a select honor that Duke received. And in 2009, Duke also received a recognition on the President's Honor Roll for civic involvement and community engagement. And matter of fact, in 2009, we received special recognition within that honor roll as one of 3 universities across the entire nation for our work with youth development and youth at risk. And a lot of this work's done by our Durham and Regional Affairs Office, Office of Community Affairs, and our Duke Engage Durham programs. So, and we also were recognized in U.S. News and World Report. So the idea is a lot of good things is going on here at Duke in terms of civic engagement, in terms of service. What I think the Klein Wells Committee report, I think the value that it adds is that we can do better. And the title of the report is Engaging Excellence. And I'd like to think that one of our things that we strive for here at Duke is excellence. So if we have excellence in some areas like interdisciplinarity, if we have excellence in our efforts in globalization and internationalization, why not raise the bar, have the highest standard for the excellence that we could have in the work that we do in civic engagement? So what the Klein Wells Committee tried to do was identify some areas that we might be able to provide more resources for, improve our infrastructure, have shore up, and I think it does a good job of identifying some of those areas. For example, I think the university would be served well if we had some resources to make a portal. So the portal, if you will, so the community would know there would be a place that they could come to find out what types of ways the community members can engage with university members. We need to do a better job in providing developmental pathways for our students. Right now, students, in my experience, have a lot of many students come in here already having service experiences, civic engagement experiences, and we need to provide them with some advice and guidance how they can build on those experiences so they don't just have a series of, say, lateral or horizontal experiences, but they can become more deeply engaged if they want to. Another area is, say, assessment and evaluation. We need to know what we're doing, what's working, what's not working. Not only in terms of program effectiveness, but also in terms of things like SACs. You know, the university is accredited by Southern Association of Schools and Colleges. So we need to work closely with our Office of Institutional Research and David Jameson Drake, and with Matt Serra in our Office of Assessment, and have an evaluation plan for what kind of outcomes are we gaining from these courses?
Good. We've got a question that's come in along the lines of integrating service and curriculum, and this one comes by email from Jamie, who says, at my high school we have a service learning requirement, but it is not curriculum-based. Can you speak to the advantages of a curriculum-based service learning requirement?
That's an excellent question, and this is true of many of our local high schools and many of our high schools across the country. Matter of fact, service learning is not something that's just happening on college campuses. It's a K-12 pedagogy too.
Okay.
And I think Jamie's question is a wonderful one, because often what high schools do is they set these number of hours requirements. Like,
Okay.
for example, I think in Chapel Hill school system, they have 50 hours that students have to accumulate by the time they graduate. Well, I think that's a positive thing, but I think it sells short what we could be doing. And that is that oftentimes students, they approach these service experiences in kind of perfunctory manners, like, how can I get my 50 hours? You know, maybe if I go to the library, or maybe if I go to a community setting, a community shelter, I can get 5 or 6 hours here. And they're disconnected. It sets up a situation where service is like a sidebar that we kind of do to meet a requirement, and it's not integrated into our lives. So I think there's a place for those types of programs, but we could do a much better job in our high schools connecting service with the academic mission of high schools. For one reason, a lot of the research shows that K-12 students in particular, this has a tremendous motivational impact on K-12 students. It makes learning real for them. It involves them in ways with intellectual and academic issues that they haven't been involved in before. They see a purpose to their learning. So that's an excellent question.
And in speaking about requiring service learning, Tulane University, in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, has made it a requirement as part of their curriculum. What do you think about that at the college level?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because I just attended a conference in Athens, Georgia, where I went to a workshop given by Tulane faculty members about this new program that they've developed. And one of the things I really like about it is it's not simply an hours requirement. It really involves like an array of possible experiences that students can have, from freshman seminars that might be civically focused to capstone honors theses that might have a civic focus. And students can select from among this array a certain number of experiences that help them meet this graduation requirement. Now, personally, I have some reservations when we begin to require service, because in some ways I think, again, it sets up a dynamic where people are doing it for reasons other than the reason of wanting and choosing to be involved with the community. So I kind of like to appeal to the more intrinsic motivations and build on those that students might have for being civically engaged and being a responsible citizen than I do to just have extrinsic sort of guidelines for students meeting. But I salute Tulane for the work they're doing, and I know it's had in talking to some of the Tulane faculty members, I know it's had a huge impact on the campus in terms of the types of students that are now applying to Tulane. It's given maybe an identity that this is part of central to their mission, so I salute them for that.
We've got another question that's come in by email that raises this same question that the New York Times story back in January did. And Stuart asked, have community institutions and nonprofit agencies welcome student help? Do they now approach you with ideas for new partnerships? The Times article said the service piece isn't always helpful to the group that's supposed to be being served. Yeah. So how do you handle that concern?
That's a great question, because I can fault myself, because I've been talking a lot here about the impact on college students of service experience, and oftentimes we forget about the service learning really occurs in a partnership, and within the definition is that it's the integration of academic learning with a service experience to meet identified needs that are identified by community partners. So it really starts with community partners. Now, what we have to be careful of and thoughtful about is our community partners, because oftentimes, there's a dark side to service learning.
Okay, what's that?
Well, it's kind of a phrase I use that we have to be careful about thinking that everything that we're doing is necessarily good. For example, if we don't provide support to our community partners in terms of they might need infrastructure support, there might be, we need to provide orientation, we need to provide training, then we can have college students overtaxing the resources that, say, nonprofits have to support the volunteers they have. So the nonprofits are taken away, say, from their mission of service to trying to handle all this, 30 Duke students that showed up their doorstep with all these questions. Now, so we have to be very careful in terms of these kind of logistical challenges of thinking. I think that another potential dark side to service learning is I've had conversations with very thoughtful people such as Sam Wells, who's Dean of the Chapel, and Carla Holloway, who's a distinguished English professor here at Duke, about they have reservations about the use of the word service itself.
Why?
Because if we're not careful, the word service can carry with it implications that we're the holders of power, we're the holders of knowledge, we're the holders of the resources, and that through our benevolence that we are going to go out into the community and bestow this knowledge and these resources and these needed skills to our community members. So it sets up a kind of an inequitable power balance in which if we're not careful, it can actually end up reinforcing sort of patronizing and condescending attitudes that college students might have about their relationship with the community. So we have to be very careful about that. Another idea that I think we really need to think about is the idea that simply by providing service that we're actually solving the problems that exist in the community. And this is something I'm really very intentional about in my own course, because in my own course, the college students are tutoring 2 hours a week, twice a week with an individual child. And the college students often talk about how transformative these experiences are and how impactful they are in terms of their own lives, and the fact that they're changing in their sense of who they are. They're engaging in perspective taking in ways that they haven't before. But they somehow think that automatically, because they might have been transformed, that we're necessarily transforming the causes of these problems in the first place. So we have to be careful that we don't assume, in my case, that just because we're providing, say, literacy tutoring to children that are at risk in the 4th and 5th grade, that we're actually solving the systemic and structural social problems that give rise to the fact that 40% of 4th and 5th graders can't read proficiently. So I'm always trying to draw my students' attention to these systemic and structural social problems and the fact that more than simple service is needed. They have to live lives of active engagement.
Good. Professor Malone, we've got about 240 people participating in online office hours, and everyone watching can participate in this conversation. To do that, send an email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet in a question for Professor Malone with the tag Duke Live, or you can post a comment on the Duke University Facebook page. We've been talking about this dynamic of service and how it's set up, and these programs are by necessity institutional. So Duke's an institution, you find an institutional partner. Is there consideration given to just relationship, informal based service? I mean, is that taught, inculcated, bringing a meal to a neighbor, visiting somebody in the hospital?
Yeah.
I think
that's what our hope is, that one of the outcomes will be that people will, as I said, leave service learning classes with wanting to live lives of being active citizens and responsible citizens. I think this is about citizenship and what it means to be a member of a community. One of the things that I do in my class is I say one of the things we have to figure out in this class, in addition to all the academic learning we're going to do, is what types of lives are we going to lead? What is an ethical life? So I think it's important to raise these kind of broader issues with our students that kind of transcend the particular service that we're doing. I think that you've used the word relationship, I think is very important.
Okay.
And I've got this kind of corny thing I do sometimes. I talk about the 5 R's of service learning, and one of them is relationship, and probably the most important one, because we build these relationships with the community, which again, this kind of goes back to the dark side. If we're not capable of sustaining and we're not in this for the long term, they actually end up creating more harm in terms of mistrust. So these relationships are really powerful. I like to think of these other R's as,
Yeah, what are they?
well, rigor. I
Okay.
mean, service learning is more than, hey, I'm a liberal, progressive professor, and I think everybody ought to go out and do something good, and I'm going to teach this class, and you students go do something. There's academic rigor to these classes. I mean, in some ways, they're very challenging to teach because you have to think very seriously about all these intersections in ways that academic and service combine. I think reciprocity is an R word that applies to service learning.
Okay.
That we're learning on the university side, but our partners are learning as well. We're getting something from them, they're getting something from us. This is a reciprocal relationship. It goes two ways. We're not the holders of all the goods. We are gaining from this. So reciprocity. I like the critical reflection. That's typically thought of the biggest R in service learning, that without the reflective piece, I mean, John Dewey said that experience itself is not a good teacher. It's the reflection on experience that helps us learn. So faculty members who teach these courses, and one of the things we do in the service learning program is that we try to support faculty members to figure out ways that they can build reflection, critical reflection, into every aspect of their course, into their class meeting times, into their readings, into their homework, into their assessments, the way they assess the students in their class. The fifth R I use is real life, because I think, and like I said, that service learning is situated, is contextualized in real life issues, and I think that does a lot of positive things to change the learning dynamic.
You mentioned John Dewey and how the overall approach to service and service learning. This is an essay that was in Inside Higher Ed back in February that your colleagues Peter Ubin and Elizabeth Quiche wrote about moral education, and they make some of the same points about the need to have the learning component as well as the service. But they're talking about moral traditions that have been thousands of years old, Judeo-Christian or Greek philosophy. Is there a kind of a framework, John Dewey or others, that you look to in giving students the big picture about the foundation for going out and tutoring somebody?
Yeah, or any other type of service experience. Yeah, I think it's very important for the students to know. One of the things I think has to happen in service learning classes is there has to be intentionality of talking about what service learning is. What are the theoretical roots of service learning? The fact that it is a pedagogy, it is an approach to teaching and learning. It is going to be different from more traditionally taught courses. That one of the things that Alma Blunt and Elizabeth Kiss and others did when they developed the FIPSE project was think a lot about what are the outcomes for college students in terms of service learning. And they really focused on three in that project, and they focused on intellectual outcomes, ethical outcomes, and civic outcomes. And so I like to think we can use that kind of three-part theoretical model about and have faculty members attend to, well, in what ways am I addressing or creating situations which will foster the development of these intellectual outcomes? How am I fostering the development of these ethical outcomes? How am I fostering the development of these civic outcomes? And to have intentionality about that.
Okay. We've got another question that's come in here by email, and everyone watching can ask Professor Malone a question. To do that, send an email to live@duke.edu. You can tweet your question with the tag Duke Live or post it on the Duke University Facebook page. This one comes from Betsy, who says, please talk about the role that students in LEAPS, that's an acronym, can play in facilitating reflection sessions and how their participation has added depth to their own lives of service. Thanks. So tell us what LEAPS is, and then into the question.
First, I have to tell you who Betsy Alden is.
Okay.
Betsy Alden is the sole mother of service learning here at Duke. She is a Duke graduate herself, and she worked very closely with Elizabeth Kiss and the Keenan Institute to develop a infrastructure to support service learning here at Duke. And one of the things Betsy did when she first arrived, she's also a faculty member who teaches in public policy in the Hart Leadership Program. So Betsy, everybody on campus knows Betsy, and when she first got here, she was approached by some Duke students, and these Duke students were interested in finding ways that they could help support service learning courses. So they created an organization called LEAPS, which stands for Learning Through Experience, Action, Partnership, and Service. And this was a student-run organization, and Professor Tony Brown was also instrumental, another Hart Leadership faculty member, in working with this organization. And what they did was they said, listen, we have a vested interest in this because we think that our education as undergraduates at Duke should have a civic component, and we want it to have a civic component. And we recognize that teaching these courses requires is challenging. I mean, you have to work, negotiate, and navigate partnerships. You have a course with say 30 students in them. Well, invariably, not all the students are completely on board. So some of them might begin to start missing their commitment. So, Dan Kessler and Glenn Gutterman, who are the two students that came and worked with Betsy, created this organization. And what LEAPS does is it provides facilitators, student facilitators to faculty members who teach service learning courses. So these students, sometimes they're people who have taken a particular course, and they work with the faculty member to design reflection sessions, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 during a semester, and other types of activities to provide a support structure and a way that students can get together without the faculty member there and talk about their service experience. Say, the course I'm currently teaching this semester, my educational psychology course, is a LEAPS course. And I have 4 students who have taken the course before, who I meet with, and we work together to design out-of-class reflection sessions that my students attend with me not there. And it's a peer-to-peer learning model and a leadership development model that I think has been really successful.
Great. So in talking about students, we've got a question that's come in from Victor about that. And he says, have you seen students who get excited about a particular field of work or service after engaging in the community?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean that's what it's all about. I think one of the impacts of service learning is on career development. And there's also personal and social developmental outcomes. So students have a better sense of who they are. And they have a better sense of how their academic life relates to their social life, relates to their career development. So for example, students in my case, many of them come to the course thinking that they may or may not want to be teachers. So some of them have the experience of actually having the service experience in the school, and they realize that, hey, I don't think I really want to be a teacher. I want to work with children in a different way. I think I'm going to go to graduate school and get a PhD in child psychology and work with children in that way. And others decide that become very enthusiastic. I think a lot of people are aware that the #1 single employer of Duke graduates right now is Teach for America, and I think in part that's because we provided all these civic engagement experiences and community service experiences and service learning classes, which have created an interest and enthusiasm among students in terms of their commitment to these types of service initiatives.
Now, what about, you've been noodling on this issue with other people in the Wells-Klein committee about how these different pieces fit together. Here at Duke, you have Duke Engage, you have the Civic Engagement Center, the Hart Leadership Program, your Service Learning Group, Keenan Institute. Okay.
Durham Regional Affairs, Office of Community Affairs. We haven't even talked about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. I mean, they got their whole thing going over there. Nicholas School, the medical school. I mean, it's happening everywhere.
So how are there lessons that one can be learning from the other, since you're interacting with many of them? Obviously, each has a niche. I mean, not everybody's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
But are there lessons that LEAPS could teach, Hart Leadership could teach, Duke Engage?
Oh yeah, I think so. And
so,
I haven't even mentioned the Center for Documentary Studies, which I think began as a Center for Documentary Photography. Alex Harris in the early 80s. So I mean, they've been pioneers as well. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm real excited about here at Duke. Tom Rankin, director of the Documentary Study Center, I recently read where he said, you know, civic engagement comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and I think it does. And I think I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from each other. And that's one of the things I'm most excited about as we provide more resources for our Duke Center for Civic Engagement is ways that we can support each other's work. Now, I don't think that needs to mean that we need to have sort of a hierarchical, centralized model where administratively everything is controlled by one center. I don't, you know, that's not really the Duke way, and I don't think anybody's advocating that. I think what we're advocating is, like you're suggesting, that there might be a place where people know about best practices. So we're not all having to, you know, relearn lessons that have already been learned in a kind of a centralized place where we can go to and have training and orientation for faculty and for students and staff that are civically involved.
Good. Professor Malone, we are well into this office hour. And so in wrapping up here, what about when a student arrives at Duke and maybe has an impulse, has done some community service in the past, what's the invitation that you put out there for service learning?
Oh, well, I mean, Duke does a great job of that. I mean, we work closely with our Student Affairs office. You know, Student Affairs is very involved in the civic engagement piece as well. And one of the things that I like that's happening now is I think we're through Steve Nowicki, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, Lee Baker, and Trinity College. We're doing a really good job of trying to find ways to integrate the social and residential aspects of students' lives with the academic lives. So in terms of when students first arrive on campus, even before they arrive in the summer reading program, you know, some of our faculty members who are most involved with these civic engagement types of issues serve on committees which help select the summer reading book that all the first year entering students read. So we begin to have these conversations. And then during the orientations that first year students have to campus, we begin with a kind of an into the city in which students, President Broadhead has been wonderful about kicking that off every year, and Dean Nowicki. And students are taken, they're shown ways that they can be involved in the community. And so I think Duke's doing a really much more effective job of presenting Duke as, you know, President Broadhead, I've heard him say that it's kind of even a paradox in a way that we call something into the city because, you know, Duke is part of the city. It's already in the city. So I think we're doing a good job of finding ways to introduce our Duke students to the great things that are happening here in Durham and also some of the needs that we have here in Durham.
Good. Well, Professor Malone, thank you for holding your office hours online here. And everyone who's watching can follow Professor Malone's work on service learning. Visit the Duke Service Learning website at educationprogram.duke.edu/service learning. A recording of this office hours session, along with many other Duke videos, will be available on the new Duke On Demand website, and that's ondemand.duke.edu. Next week on Office Hours, look for Professor Bob Cook-Deegan taking up the topic of patenting genes. To learn more about Duke, you visit duke.edu.